a new morality emerging in the United States. And the first woman to ever run for president was not Hillary Clinton or Sarah Palin, but it was Victoria Woodhull, who ran for president in the year 1872, 50 years before women gained even the right to vote on the national level. Yeah, and she still ran for president. And Victoria Woodhull is a new age kind of woman. She does not necessarily fit into the moral happenings of the 1870s. She definitely is not conventionally moral. First of all, keep talking about this morality and morals. What is that? It's kind of like, the idea of how you should behave in society. Okay? She doesn't fit into that at all. In 1871, the young, talented, beautiful, eloquent divorcee, which is right there, is big, was a brilliant stockbroker. She was really good with the money, and she was tireless in her writing of feminist propaganda.
Most women that talk about are all about women. That's like they all.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are awesome women. This lady's a little radical. Now, not radical in that she's like pro-women. That's fantastic. She's radical for her era, okay? In that she would, her and her sister, whose name was Tennessee Shaflin, what a cool name. Imagine a girl named Tennessee. Think about that for your own children in 30 years or so. They issued a periodical called Woodhull and Shaflin Weekly, and it came out once a week, where they talked about how women have the right to everything men do, including free love. When we talk about free love, what period of American history do you usually think about?
Oh, 70s.
Yeah, like the 60s and 70s, Woodstock, free love, man. What's free love? Hopefully you guys don't know. The idea that you can have sex with anyone you want, whenever you want, regardless, no consequences. That's free love. She's saying this in 1872, and she's a woman. So she doesn't necessarily fit the mold. And you see this whiskered gentleman here. His name is Anthony Comstock. And he made it his lifelong crusade to take on anything that he deemed immoral. They even made a law named after him in 1873 called the Comstock Law, which made anything that really he deemed immoral illegal. Things like obscene pictures and photographs. Things like pills and powders that terminate pregnancies. Things like obscene posters on saloon walls. And he confiscated hundreds of thousands of items himself. Needless to say, Victoria Woodhull and Anthony Comstock were not best friends, as you might imagine. And the antics of the Woodhull sisters in their periodical, Woodhull and Shaflin Weekly, highlighted an ongoing battle in America over the sexual attitudes and place of women in America. And this is at a time when you begin to see like the telephone. And who's operating those switchboards? Women. The invention of the typewriter. Who's becoming secretaries? Women. Women are increasingly using the tools of their own liberation They can get a job. They can support themselves. They do not require a man to live. And this economic freedom encouraged greater freedom in other portions of life, according to Victoria Woodhull. And to some extent, she's right. Well, I mean, obviously, women are equal. So this new morality, according to Woodhull, led to an increase in the spread of the use of birth control, as women were less eager to have children, and more children, and more children. It saw increase in divorce rates, which is really not good. And she even ran for president in 1872 in a party known as the Equal Rights Party. Her running mate, who really didn't even know he was on a ticket, is the first African American to run for president or vice president, and his name was Frederick Douglass. She put him on there; he didn't even know.
Like that one? Like
That one, that Frederick Douglass, yeah, nationally, known guy. All right, big time abolitionist, former slave. Okay, that's a picture of Victoria there at the bottom right. She's a catch, Comstock, I like his whiskers. Those are cool. Yeah. All right. Now, this is not the only type of morality that is seen, is spreading and having this disagreement about. You also see some other women at the forefront of this new morality. Even all through the 1880s, 90s, fiery feminists continued to insist on the ballot. And, this new generation had taken command of the suffrage battle, and the most effective leader of this new suffrage battle was Carrie Chapman Catt. Carrie Chapman Catt. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, they're very old. They're not able to travel the nation anymore like they once were. And Catt stressed the desirability of giving women the right to vote because if they're going to be better homemakers, better mothers, then they need to be increasingly knowledgeable about the world so that their children are prepared better. So she kind of uses the cult of domesticity to her advantage, saying if you want us to be better mothers, you should let us be more informed, let us have an opinion, let us participate. Pretty good argument. And then you see ladies like Carrie A. Nation. What a fantastic name. Carrie A. Nation. That was her. She did. She did. She did. This lady stands about, 4.5 feet tall. And she made it her life's work to go on a crusade against demon alcohol. All alcohol. That's how she saw it. And you begin to see a movement throughout the United States, mainly among women, for prohibition. Even in the 1860s. What is prohibition?
The banning of alcohol.
That's right. The banning of the manufacture, transportation, all that, consumption, alcohol. Why?
Because their husbands
Yeah.
get drunk.
Husbands get drunk, don't work, beat them up, beat up their children, have poor judgment. All the things that come with drinking alcohol even today. So a lot of leagues begin to form, like the Women's Christian Temperance League Union, Women's Christian Temperance Union, 1874. Anti-Saloon League, 1893. Saloons are not like bars. A lot of illegal activities go on in saloons. Prostitution, gambling, alcohol. Not that alcohol was or is illegal at that point. But Carrie A. Nation was a woman abused by her alcoholic husband who ended up drinking himself to death. And so she made it her life's work. She went throughout like the state of Kansas with a hatchet, roll up in a saloon and just start busting up barrels of beer and bottles of liquor. And she's like 4.5 feet tall, okay? And, she just was a member of these parties, and she was pretty bold in her hatchetations. So she brought considerable disrepute to the Prohibition movement because what she was doing was illegal. You can't roll up into a public place and start swinging a hatchet around, okay? So, but it eventually is a movement that does catch some ground in the 19 teens after World War I, where Prohibition actually happens. It happens, okay? Which leads America down another road. And we'll get that in period 7. Okay? All right, during this time is also a great period of amusement. Americans love to be entertained, love entertainment. And it was big business as things like vaudeville. You ever heard of vaudeville? Vaudeville? It's basically like comedy, live comedy shows, theatrical action, a lot of physical comedy, graceful acrobatics. Circuses. You guys know what a circus is, don't you? And a man that was responsible for building the most well-known circus was Phineas T. Barnum and his partner Bailey, Barnum and Bailey Circus.
They made a movie.
They did. I think Hugh Jackman played Phineas T. Barnum. Phineas T. Barnum, not as handsome as Hugh Jackman. Sorry, guys. All right. But he and James A. Bailey staged the greatest show on earth, is what they dubbed it, in 1881. Other popular forms of attraction were colorful Wild West shows, performed by people like William F. Cody, also known as Buffalo Bill, where they would travel around and they would actually go out west and get Indians, like real ones, and pay them to whoop around and chase them in a theater performance. You guys ever been to like a Dixie Stampede or a Medieval Times? Kind of like that. There would be shows of marksmanship by this particular lady who was an actual real marksman. Like some of her shots were trick, but she actually had to pull off a significant, like holding the mirror and shooting stuff backwards using a mirror. Like she could do that. It was real. And her name's Annie Oakley. Even here at Theater, West Virginia, we do a little Annie Oakley performance. Annie, get your gun, right? You ever heard of that? But those are very popular. I mean, there'd be buffalo running around, and it was horses and whooping Indians. It was theater, and they would do this they would go to like New York City and set up in like Yankee Stadium and do this, and then they leave and they go somewhere else and make big bucks, big entertainment.
Didn't they like kill all the American buffalo there and stuff?
No, there's still some around, not all of them, but yeah, it was policy to kill a lot of bison, American bison. We also have a love of sports that really begins to emerge in this time period with baseball, which was actually believed to be invented during the Civil War by soldiers. I don't know if that's 100% historically accurate. But a league of professional players formed in the 1870s. And in 1888, an all-star team of baseball players toured the world. They played baseball in front of the pyramids in Egypt to try to spread the love of the game. Basketball, invented in America, just as baseball was invented in America in 1891. You guys know who invented basketball?
Jewish people?
No. Say it again?
A gym teacher.
Yeah, basically. He was a doctor. Dr. James Naismith invented basketball in 1891. at a YMCA in Massachusetts. You ever heard the expression, necessity breeds invention? What's winter like in Massachusetts? Oh, worse than here. He wanted to come up with an activity for the boys to play indoors in the wintertime. So he hung a couple peach baskets on the wall and invented the rules of basketball, which are today housed at the University of Kansas. Literally, he just wrote them down on a piece of paper and invented basketball. All right? James Naismith, 1891. There was also a certain need for Americans loving brutality, and football certainly filled that void. Football nearly died in America because there was not really any professional leagues, so who played football? High schoolers, and then the highest league of football was college. All right? And the best league was the Ivy League. Harvard, Yale, Brown, Dartmouth, Penn. These are your best football playing schools. But who are the people going to those schools?
Rich kids.
Rich and smart. The thing about football is that people died playing it pretty regularly. It was extremely dangerous. Like, they didn't have the good equipment. They didn't have the rules to protect the players. And like every year, these brilliant college students going to these Ivy League schools are dying. And so football nearly died until the presidency really of Teddy Roosevelt. He stepped in and changed the rules of football to allow the forward pass and changed the rules of the game entirely. And now football is the number one sport in America. What was the number one sport in America at this time, 1880s, 90s?
Baseball.
Punching people in the face, also known as boxing. Whether it be gloved or bare knuckle. Bare knuckle boxing, not uncommon. That was the most popular sport in America, boxing. Easy to gamble on. All right. Other forms of entertainment swept more throughout the general population. People could actually participate in themselves relatively easily. You could have 18 people play a baseball game. 22 to play a football game. But things like the safety bicycle. Right, you see the bicycle with the enormous wheels? That was the first bicycle. I want you to imagine trying to hop on that thing and ride. Oh my gosh. People were like killing themselves on these bicycles. Once the safety bicycle was invented, much more popular activity. Much more popular activity. Croquet. You guys ever played croquet in your yard? You put the little hoops up with the mallet and you hit the balls. Not serious, obviously. Nobody's ever played a serious croquet game. But it did become very popular at this time period. And then obviously your other forms of popular reading, shopping, talking on the telephone, the very popular activities and forms of entertainment. And all of these things make America more diverse and yet more similar at the same time, because we all have a love of at least something here. Okay? All right, questions on that? All right, so we did talk about we were doing the progressive movement, correct? Oh, that's sad. Well, that M should be here. I don't know how that happened. Formatting error. So isolationism is where I left you, I believe. And this is an idea that began when America began, the 1790s, and it existed up until this time. What ended the ideas of isolationism? Yeah, getting involved in foreign affairs such as?
Trade.
Mainly our commercial interests, trading with foreign nations. We couldn't be isolationists because we weren't isolationists. We were everywhere. And all the while that is going on, what was that type? Newspaper industry found that they could make more money by engaging in what type of journalism? Sensationalism. That's exactly right. Also known as yellow journalism. Also known as sensationalism. You're exactly right. It's the same thing. Sensationalism because it appeals to your senses. That's why it's called sensational. So, and Americans are intensely aware of the dramatic changes going on around them, and they know that they could not afford to be isolated from the rest of the world. And the catalyst, the thing that makes America going from, hey, we're just this island nation over here. Yeah, we got some people and some power and some wealth, but we just want to be left alone. The thing that takes us from thinking like that to thinking like, hey, you know what? We're the most dominant country in the world, and nobody can stop us. The thing that makes that happen is yellow journalism. It is solely responsible for that. Because the use of yellow journalism draws us into a conflict with an extremely old empire, which was once upon a time the most powerful empire on the earth. And that was Spain. No, not quite. We have no beef with the Mongols.
Yeah.
So, the real catalyst comes from the mid-1890s, where the Spanish-American War begins. And just so you know, it's the most lopsided war in American history. The Spanish Empire it had been decaying since like the 1600s. It had been on the decline. 1500s, early 1600s, you didn't mess with Spain. You didn't mess with them. That's Christopher Columbus, all that Spanish expansion, Cortez, the conquistadors. You didn't mess with Spain. Just ask a Native American. You don't mess with the Spanish. All right? 1900, 1890s, they're old, they're decrepit. They're not even able to take care of their own home country, much less an empire thousands of miles away. So they were still a global power, just very weak. And when it came to one of their possessions was Cuba. It belonged to Spain. However, America, have we been investing in foreign places? We have been, as part of our commercialism. We had invested heavily in Cuba, and in fact, even though Cuba was a Spanish possession, Americans own 90% of Cuba. What were we growing there? Sugar. Americans own 90% of the sugar cane in Cuba. And Cuba was owned by Spain. So really, who owns Cuba? We have the valuable stuff there. They just have the government authority. So you have a recipe for trouble right there. Because, if I'm the government authority, wouldn't I want the benefit of growing the sugar like used to be? Yeah. But it wasn't the case anymore. Americans had invested so heavily and really taken Cuban over commercially. Not politically, not governmentally, economically. So, the people of Cuba wanted to try to overthrow the Spanish authority, a revolution. And in order for the people of Cuba to win a revolution against the Spanish, they would need the help of the United States. So, how do you get the United States involved? A country that is like, isolationism, small government. We're just going to stay over here and have small military. Nobody's going to mess with us. Isolationist. How do you get a country like that to get involved? Huh?
Stop trade.
Say it one more time.
Stop trade.
Stop trade. That's a good guess. You just make it up. You just tell lies in the newspapers. Get Americans angry. America's supposedly a democracy. If the people want to go to war, shouldn't the people get a war? And that's how it happened. Totally made up. Thanks a lot, William Randolph Hearst, and an artist that he sent to Cuba named Frederick Remington. So, as you know, America is and was a democracy. And so you had to get the American people on board for a war. So they used mass media, newspapers most particularly, to sway the public's opinion. The owners of the newspapers had to get interest going about the doings and goings on in Cuba. So William Randolph Hearst sends Frederick Remington, who is a talented artist, to Cuba and tells him to draw some pictures of the unrest going on in Cuba between the Cuban people and the Spanish authorities. So I want to see some physical, tangible, artistic renderings of the atrocities going on in Cuba. So Frederick Remington goes there, and what does he find? There's no atrocities going on there, William. So basically, William Randolph Hearst is like, just draw me up some atrocities, and I'll write newspaper stories to corroborate it. And that's what he did. And that's what people read in the newspaper. And they're like, did you see this story about these Spanish people, the Catholic people are like killing innocent Cubans, like those evil Spanish. They're just like lining them up and shooting them, and like seeing how many, lining them up in a row and seeing how many they can kill with one bullet. Just making stuff up. Trying to paint the Spanish as evil. Evil. Now, needless to say, their stories were inaccurate. They made up some things to make stories, which make it more interesting, which sells more newspapers. All intended to kind of get Cuba. We want Cuba. Get America going. So that's secondary. What's the main goal of the newspaper company? Make money, sell newspapers. War sells newspapers. I guarantee you, if America declares war today, I'm going to turn on the news and watch. Otherwise, I'm not watching the news. But if they have stories about interesting things going on, I'm going to watch. So I might not be seeing truthful things, as is evidenced through history, but I'm still going to consume it because that's what I do. That's what we as Americans do. So the newspapers are painting these revolutionaries as helpless, and they wanted to get the U.S. public involved, okay? So, as Jenna mentioned yesterday, there's a scene from Citizen Kane. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Citizen Kane, but it's this reader that comes in and he's upset about what's going on. And this is supposedly like the character based on William Randolph Hearst. George Hearst was his dad. And basically, Hearst is like, you give me the headlines and I'll give you the war. Like, he fabricates a war. One newspaper man, essentially. All right? So, now there are some other things that have to happen in order to get America from being like, oh, that's just so horrible. I feel so bad for those Cuban people. To actually say, hey, I'm willing to go fight and risk my life to kill those people. There's a big difference from being like, oh, that's terrible, to let's go get them. All right? So they got to go from one point to the other. So they, continue with the inaccurate articles. There's one article from 1897 in the New York Herald. It's like, Spanish soldiers employ thousands of Cuban virgin women as housewomen. Like, they're using Cuban virgins as like their sex slaves. Oh, that's horrible. And you read that one day, over time it'll kind of wither away at you. So the president of the United States in the late 1890s was, anybody remember? He won the election of 1896. Anybody know? William McKinley. William McKinley. So William McKinley's kind of had some pressure put on him. And he makes a diplomatic request for the Spanish to negotiate with Cuba. Hey, Spain, send some people to Cuba and get this straightened out. You're not going to allow all these atrocities to go on. And I tell you what, I'll even send a guy over there with you to serve as a mediator to make sure things go smoothly. Seems logical.
Did Spain know that American newspapers were spreading lies?
Well, they did after this. Once they received this message from McKinley, what do you think Spain's response is?
They're confused.
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
I'm not sending anybody. Everything's fine. Butt out. Wouldn't you? Isn't that kind of what you would say? Yeah. So, McKinley makes more demands. Spain continues to refuse. And all the while, what's going on in America with President McKinley? Do you think the American people are, hey, President, what are you doing? Why isn't anything, why are there still being these reports in newspapers, Presidente? What are you doing about it? So pressure's being put on McKinley to do something about this crisis in Cuba. So, there's really nothing going on there. So the U.S. continues to demand mediation. Spanish continues to turn them down. They end up turning them down 3 separate times. In response to the third demand being denied, the United States turns to what's called gunboat diplomacy. Gunboat diplomacy. Do you guys know what that is? Gunboat diplomacy. Americans send battleships around the area of Cuba and some other Spanish possessions on a goodwill mission. Brings supplies. And that's what, is reported. But who's bringing the supplies to the people of Cuba? Say, the United States military on warships, also loaded not just with, corn, but like bombs and guns. All right? Now, so needless to say, there are a lot of ships parked around Cuba that belong to America. And then an incident occurs. While many of the American ships were surrounding Cuba, the USS Maine blows up in Havana Harbor. It explodes. Newspapers say what? Those Spanish have attacked us. You know what actually happened? Somebody was smoking in the room where they kept the gunpowder, and it exploded. Look at it. It blew up from the inside out. It is an inside-out explosion. Do you see that? I mean, that's a lot of wreckage and hard to, but you can tell how it blew up from the inside out, not from the outside in, which is how it would be if they were attacked. What is printed in the newspapers though? That they were attacked. Most likely, it's just a simple accident. Just an accident. It happens. I mean, you have 1,000 boats parked somewhere with a bunch of poorly trained sailors. It could happen. All right. So, anyhow, it gets printed in the newspapers. Spain is attacking us. What is going to energize the American people more than a feeling of being attacked by a foreign power? Not much. I lived through 9/11. You want to see some angry, energized people, you should have been around September 12th, 2001. People were angry and were willing to send their children to go fight. Like, you need to go sign up to fight. That's all it takes is the feeling that we're under attack. So, enter this letter, the Delhomme letter. The Spanish ambassador to the United States was a man named Delhomme. And he wrote his friend in Cuba about his opinion of President McKinley. And President McKinley and the United States government intercepted this letter. When it arrived there, Cuban revolutionaries got it, and they turned it over to the American government. And basically the letter says lots of insulting things about President McKinley. It literally says, I don't say this, but it's what the letter said. It said that President McKinley had no balls. That's what it said. What do you think the newspapers did when they found out about this letter? This was actually a real letter.
Ran it a lot.
It printed in every newspaper. Do you think, not just the President of the United States, you think a man in general wants to be insulted nationally? Says he has no testicular fortitude. How you prove it otherwise? What would be the testicularly thing to do?
Fight him.
There you go. Machismo, manliness. So let's go send people to die so that I don't appear to be weak. And that's what happens. Can you believe this? I can. So, McKinley responded drastically. He does call for one more mediation first. Like, hey, let's try to talk this out first. Turned down again. And so McKinley begins to make preparations to ask Congress for a declaration of war. So ultimately, he caves to public pressure. Is there a need for war? We already had 90% of the Cuban sugar. What are we going to get? 10%. So he caved to public pressure, and he convinced that a war was necessary to help those poor people in Cuba. Now, is Cuba the only possession that Spain has? Spain has territory all over the world. And there were people, like the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt. He's like, President McKinley, if we're going to war with Spain, let's not just stop at Cuba. Let's take everything they got. They got the Philippines. They got Guam. They got Puerto Rico. They got Hawaii. They got all kind of stuff. Let's get it. Let's take it all.
If they've been like crumbling for so long, why did no one try to take it before then?
War's not popular, and it's expensive for everybody. So that's why. And you also have to have a real good reason, unless somebody just makes it up. Okay? So, Teddy Roosevelt is one of those progressives. Born in a city, he is a progressive guy, highly educated, has traveled the world, and he's in a position of power. Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He held the position that let's get it all. Not just Cuba, let's not set our sights so short. Now, both, so what do you think McKinley says about that? No. Problem in Cuba. Cuba's close to us. It's only 90 miles off the coast of Florida. This is it. Cuba is it. All right? How do you think TR feels about that? He doesn't like it. You know, he's a progressive guy. He's like, maybe that Delhomme letter's right about you. That's what he's thinking. But in the meantime, what's his job, Teddy Roosevelt's job? Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Kind of powerful, but is he really able to make any decisions? No. Well, the President of the United States and the Secretary of Navy basically kind of, I don't want to say disappear, but they leave Teddy Roosevelt unsupervised for 2 days. And Teddy Roosevelt sends a telegraph to a squadron of American warships that were stationed in the Pacific under the command of Admiral George Dewey. And Teddy Roosevelt, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Navy and has this authority, tells George Dewey to immediately go to the Philippines and go there. And then, if you are engaged by the Spanish, then you get the green light to annihilate them. Who does TR tell about this plan? No one. So basically, the United States military is on the move with the intent of war without the knowledge of the President of the United States or even the Director of the Navy. Roosevelt then gives further instructions. Once you are successful in destroying the Spanish Navy there, link up with with Filipino revolutionaries and overthrow the government. He's doing this all on his own. No permission. That's pretty bold.
Well, did it work?
What do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, because he was president.
Yeah. Man, the timing couldn't really have been more perfect. All right? So he sends the telegram. Admiral Dewey gets it, acknowledges it, and heads out. 2 days later, Congress issues its war declaration. Congress declares war. 45 minutes after Congress declares war, that is when the fighting began. They didn't even know. It just happened that way. And then McKinley starts to get telegrams. Hey, congratulations on your successes in the Philippines. We have successfully defeated the Spanish Armada. He's like, what? What? What is going on? Is Dewey out of his mind? What's he doing over there? Needless to say, he finds out who did it. And guess what happens to Roosevelt? You fired. So, Dewey was out to sea. The U.S. Navy was the most modern Navy in the world. It wasn't the largest, but it was the most modern. It had diesel ships that could move around quickly, as opposed to coal-fired steam engine ships. And when Dewey went to the Philippines and engaged the Philippine Navy in battle, it was Dewey and his fleet of ships versus the Spanish ships. Every single Spanish ship was destroyed. Every single one. The United States lost 0 ships. So about 2,000 Spanish sailors died. All their ships were lost. Very lopsided. So after that, what does Dewey do? What was he told to do?
Overthrow the government.
Link up with the Filipino revolutionaries, and he does, in the form of a young man named Emilio Aguinaldo. As you can see, I have 3 pictures here. It's all the same person. But look how you think he's important in the future? Yeah. So he links up with a young man named Emilio Aguinaldo. Aguinaldo is a Filipino revolutionary who wants to see the Spanish gone and then replace the Spanish control with what control? Replace the Spanish with who's Spanish in charge? He wants to replace it with what in charge? Themselves. Self-government. No foreign power. All right, that's what he wants. And that's what Dewey promises him. Hey, help me get rid of the Spanish and you can have the Philippines. That doesn't happen. Aguinaldo helps him get rid of the Spanish, and then who takes control of the Philippines? The United States of America. So they just replace one power with another. So, at the time, though, Aguinaldo cooperates. And the Spanish government in Manila, which was the capital of the Philippines, was in shock. And they fought for a while. And after about 15 minutes of fighting, they surrendered. Philippines had fallen. Manila fell. Dewey telegraphs McKinley and informs him that we've overthrown a government, destroyed every single ship in the Spanish Navy, linked up with revolutionaries, and dispensed of the Spanish government in the Philippines, all of which McKinley had no idea about. So he's going to fire Roosevelt, but actually Roosevelt resigns. Does that mean Roosevelt's done? No. What does Roosevelt do after he resigns? Does he go fight? Yeah. Is Roosevelt in the military, though? Like, is he actually, like, boot camp trained and all that? He forms his own group of militia. They're called the Rough Riders. The Rough Riders. And there they are. He designed their own uniforms and stuff. I mean, he's a wealthy dude. He formed the Rough Riders. Early in TR's life, yeah. Early in TR's life, like as a young man in his 20s, he was married, and his wife was giving birth, and she died in childbirth. And then, later on that same day, his mother died. So he lost his wife and his mother on the same day. That day was February the 14th, Valentine's Day. Rough day. Needless to say, he fell into a very great depression, and he went out west and became a cowboy. He bought a cattle ranch and started doing cowboy stuff, and he met a lot of people, rough people, frontier people. And he recruited them in 1898 to join the Rough Riders and go fight a war in Cuba. And that's what he does. And he's like, I'm not going to say he's crazy, but he was like totally ready to go kill people. Led the Rough Riders in the battle, whether they needed to or not. He's like, you see that hill up there? I think there's Spanish up there. We're going for it. Let's go. And he would be the first one in. He had like 4 horses shot out from under him. He had holes in all of his clothes, but never sustained a wound. Now, meanwhile, like 60% of the Rough Riders died because he's like, hey, let's go fight. They got the upper position. What could possibly go wrong? A lot. But he formed the Rough Riders. They fought bravely in Cuba.
How did he get there? Did he have his own native thing?
How did they? All right, it's unbelievable. How you're not going to believe it how they get
Don't
there.
tell me they swim.
No. All right, so there was fighting in the Philippines. Cuba is the main action. That's where the main action of the Spanish-American War went down. All right. U.S. Congress makes their declaration of war very enthusiastically. Once Madrid, the capital of Spain, hears that America has declared war on them, they backdate their war declaration, so it appears that they declared war on America first. And so then America hears that they backdated theirs, and the Congress goes and meets again and backdates their declaration of war. Do you know when the Spanish-American War was officially declared? July 3rd, 1776. That's as far back as America could go. That's when America became America. Literally, they said that we declared war on you on July 3rd, 1776. Spain was like, well, we declared war on you in like 1400. They're a lot older. How stupid. This is like the silly macho posturing that caused all this stuff. A bunch of idiots. Idiots. Anyway, Cuba was a problem. They're not going to surrender without a fight. 60% of all Spain's navy was at Cuba. There was no real good place to land our soldiers because they had the good defensive positions on it. No way to get into Santiago Bay without being blown out of the water. And we had to get into Havana, which was the capital of Cuba. So we started our staging area. Do you know what the staging area was for us to arrive in Cuba? Orlando, Florida. Disney World. Now, there was no Disney World there. It was just a big swamp. But that's where we started. Just like, hey, everybody, we're going to Disney. And then we're going to go kill people. Now, the United States military did have the most modern ships in the world. We just didn't have a lot of them. We didn't have any way of getting all those troops that were in Orlando to Cuba. So we contacted Dole. You ever heard of Dole? Ever eat a Dole banana? Or the fruit company. And Dole loaned us their banana boats. I kid you not. We rode banana boats from Disney World to Cuba. Wow. So, fortunately, the landings were met with very little colonial resistance and were often met by the Cuban revolutionaries, the good guys, the people that were on the American side. And they played a pretty important role. They helped to guide American forces through the hills of Cuba. The revolutionaries kept everything organized because you're fighting in the mountains and jungles. Cuba's pretty unforgiving territory. All in all, 60,000 American soldiers made it to Cuba, to Santiago, in July of 1898. 60,000 men mobilized. How long did the war last once the troops arrived? 1 week. 1 week. The turning point of the Spanish-American War was when Teddy Roosevelt took his Rough Riders and led them up San Juan Hill. No, I don't have a picture of it. Led them up San Juan Hill. Very lopsided war. And I'll stop there. Have a nice day. You guys like the Spanish-American War? Pretty fascinating stuff.